this side event on women, girls, and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. I'm Dr. David Boyd, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, and I'm just really delighted to be on this panel with a bunch of brilliant women and also to have some brilliant girls joining us for this event. But I'm going to turn the microphone over to our moderator, our host for today, Diana Rizzolio, who's from the Geneva Environmental Network, which is sponsored by the government of Switzerland and coordinated by the United Nations Environment Program. Diana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boyd, for bringing us together this afternoon to discuss a few months after the adoption by the General Assembly of the resolution recognizing the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, the path towards gender equality and ecological sustainability in that context. This side event is organized by your office and sponsored by various member states, which I will now list: Costa Rica, the Maldives, Slovenia, and Switzerland, all members of the core group on human rights and the environment, as well as the Principality of Monaco and Germany, UN Women and the United Nations Environment Program, and as well as the Geneva Environment Network. I am, as you already introduced me, so let me remind for who is not yet aware that you will be presenting, Dr. Boyd, this week, the report on women, girls, and the right to a healthy environment to the Council. And this is also the week we are celebrating International Women's Day. After you were welcome, we proceed now with the opening statements, and it's our pleasure to give first the floor to, and I'm looking, Her Excellency is there, to Her Excellency Ambassador Anita Pipan, the permanent representative of Slovenia to the United Nations in Geneva. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Boyd, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting us to speak at today's event on two of our priorities in the Human Rights Council and international fora in general, which are human right to clean, healthy, sustainable environment and women and girls. These two topics are also intrinsic parts of a feminist foreign policy of our new first female foreign minister. Let me, at the outset, thank you, Dr. Boyd, also for your participation at the high-level ministerial side event on mainstreaming the right to healthy, clean, sustainable environment, which hopefully set the tone for our engagement at the current session of the Human Rights Council, which is extremely important when it comes to the right to clean, healthy, sustainable environment. The side event at the high-level segment of the Human Rights Council was the first side event with the participation of the ministers of the core group, the members of which were just enumerated. And I believe that this is a testimony to our political commitment to make the right to healthy environment truly meaningful for the right holders, not least for women and girls. We share the concerns Dr. Boyd so eloquently raised in his latest report to the Human Rights Council over the disproportionate impacts of global environmental crisis on women and girls. Data in your report shows some alarming developments. For example, that women comprise 70% of the world's poor. They do 3 times more unpaid household and care work. They receive 20% lower wages for the same work, and many other examples of disparities. When it comes to women and environment, in short, in my opinion, the environmental crisis is not gender neutral. My government was really happy to engage with the Special Rapporteur on his country visit to Slovenia in September last year. I hope, Dr. Boyd, you have witnessed the commitment of Slovenia to gender equality, also in relation to the triple planetary crisis. I would like to share with you 2 practical examples of putting gender equality in climate environmental agenda. One is the new Slovenian law on climate change. It's currently being drafted and has gender equality strongly mainstreamed into its provision. Another example, it's a regional international project with the Slovenian Forestry Institute under the name Fem for Forests, Forests in Women's Hands. It's being implemented in the Danube region, and it aims to empowering women and girls as climate and environmental leaders in the forestry sector. In conclusion, I would like to use this opportunity to express on behalf of the core group our sincere appreciation to Dr. Boyd for all your work related to the human rights and the environment. I'm sure that together we will push even harder using our minds and hearts and work towards a world where all people, in particular women and girls, can enjoy their right to clean, healthy and sustainable environment. I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. We will now turn to Adriana Quinones, the Head of Human Rights and Development of UN Women here in Geneva, for additional opening remarks.
Thank you very much. A year ago, we were celebrating the resolution to the right to a clean environment, and we said that we will come back and see what the results have been a year later, integrating a gender perspective, integrating the voices of women and girls. And I would like to share with you that UN Women with UNDP did an analysis of 5,000 policy measures around the world for the recovery after the COVID crisis, and found that only 23% of task forces to address recovery included women. It also found that the stronger the women's movement, the stronger the response and the results for women's and girls' lives. This year, this tracker is being updated to include a green perspective. So it's going to be on green and gender recovery options after COVID, which I think is a key issue to look into the implementation of this resolution. One key issue has always been participation. Are women included in the negotiations? Are women benefiting from the different projects? But also, how much of these policy measures are taking into account the key elements for gender equality and women's empowerment, including looking at aspects of social protection, employability, new skills for new jobs for a new economy, but also addressing discrimination, including violence against women and girls. So I will share a few of the findings, even though this tracker is being updated and will be released later this year. But only 18 out of 705 measures that were looked at initially by OECD in the Green Recovery Database assessed gender relevance and gender sensitivity. Only 2.5% are considered gender relevant, and 13 of the gender relevant measures are also considered to be gender sensitive. Half of the gender relevant green recovery measures are linked to skills, training, research and development subsidies, and when assessed based on gender sensitivity, the majority of the gender sensitive recovery measures will contribute to supporting women's economic security. Gender-relevant measures are concentrated in sectors such as buildings, energy, and surface transport, but no gender-relevant measures are found in the database on other sector categories like agriculture, forestry, maritime transport, air transport, industry, or waste management, where we have a lot of women occupied in these sectors, indicating a vast untapped potential for introducing a gender perspective into the design and implementation of green recovery measures. So always looking at where we are and how we can move forward in this collective effort, my key message for today is that gender and climate can come together, can alleviate suffering, can alleviate poverty, can increase development, but also can diminish and address structural barriers for the participation of women. And so the majority of the measures that were assessed were likely to have positive impacts in the environment, taking gender considerations into account when designing and implementing green recovery measures could contribute both to reducing gender inequalities and achieving environmental objectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Before moving to the panel discussion, to introduce you to the topic we are going to discuss further, we will watch a video message from a young girl leader from Guatemala. Her name is Nicte Cal, and she's 13 years old. In the video, Nicte speaks in her native language, which is Spanish, on the harm done to the Rio Cajabon, among others, and also about the fight of her father to defend the environment in Guatemala. Her father is Bernardo Cals, and he has been jailed for that. The colleagues will now start the streaming.
Soy Nictecal Maxir, Mayacacchi Cachiquel de Guatemala, Centroamérica. En mi familia y en mi cultura he aprendido que el agua es nuestra vida. La humanidad y las distintas especies de animales, plantas y otros seres que existen en la madre naturaleza no pueden sobrevivir sin agua. El agua es nuestra fuente de vida. Por lo tanto, defender el agua es defender nuestra vida. El medio ambiente ha cambiado terriblemente a partir del secuestro de nuestros sagrados ríos. Las comunidades mayas están más vulnerables. El impacto de las tormentas Iota y Eta ocurridos en noviembre del año 2020 es un ejemplo de ello. Toda la vida de los ecosistemas y la biodiversidad que existió en nuestros ríos cuando eran libres fueron destruidas. Las plantas y animales como peces, cangrejos, jutes y otras especies que extraíamos del río para alimentarnos ahora ya no existen. Desde que llegaron las hidroeléctricas Renace y Oshek, el río Cabón y el río Oshek fueron capturados, fueron secuestrados por alrededor de 50 kilómetros. Las aguas del río Cabón y Oshek ya no recorren el camino que recorrían hace miles de años. Defender los ecosistemas y la biodiversidad del río Cabón es luchar por la vida de nuestra madre tierra, la vida de nuestra madre naturaleza, luchar por nuestra vida y por la de las siguientes generaciones. No podemos ser solamente observadoras de la destrucción de nuestro medio ambiente. Debemos informarnos de lo que sucede y actuar. Cuando nuestros padres y madres se atreven a defender nuestros ríos, son criminalizados y encarcelados injustamente. Las hidroeléctricas, junto al Estado de Guatemala, siguen despojándonos de nuestros bienes naturales. Principalmente nos quitan el acceso al agua de nuestros ríos. Durante 4 años y 2 meses no pude abrazar y convivir con mi papá, porque la empresa contratada por las hidroeléctricas Oshek Sociedad Anónima le inventaron delitos. El sistema de justicia corrupto que opera en Guatemala encarceló a mi padre sin ninguna prueba en su contra. Estos son daños irreparables e irreversibles que me causaron a mí y a mi hermanita. Pero también es la historia que viven muchísimas niñas del país. Mi padre únicamente defendió al río. Mi padre únicamente reclamó el derecho a ser consultados, como lo establece el convenio 169 de la OIT. Espero que la Organización de las Naciones Unidas exija a los estados a que las empresas cumplan con la obligación de reparación de daños ocasionados al medio ambiente. También espero que la Organización de las Naciones Unidas exija a los estados que los países, especialmente en Guatemala, ya no se autoricen más licencias de operación a minerías hidroeléctricas y monocultivos, porque estos megaproyectos son violadores de derechos humanos y es un sistema de muerte que se impone en nuestros territorios. Exijo a las agencias internacionales que dejen de financiar megaproyectos en nuestros países, porque solamente causan muerte y destrucción en nuestro territorio, al medio ambiente, al agua y a los bienes naturales.
Thank you, Nicte. Actually, her mother tongue is Maya, and she made the effort of speaking in Spanish. We are now moving to our panel discussion, and we have with us Dr. David Boyd, the UN Special Rapporteur, who has already welcomed you all here. We have on my left Viviana Tinoco, who is Minister Consular at the Permanent Mission of Costa Rica. Joining us online, Priska, a child activist who is based in Kigali, Rwanda. We have also with us Stephanie Keane, an international human rights lawyer. And finally, So-Young Wang, legal officer at the United Nations Environment Program, based now in Nairobi. But many of you know her from her previous functions. So let's start the discussion with Dr. Boyd. This event and the panel discussion is part of the discussion on your latest thematic report to the Human Rights Council on women, girls, and the right to a healthy environment that Her Excellency has already referred to. As we have heard, you will be presenting this report this week on Thursday, 9th of March. What are the main conclusions reached and concerns raised in the thematic report? And if you could also share with us key recommendations, that would be great. Dr. Boyd, over to you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends and colleagues. This report was inspired by my 17-year-old daughter, Meredith, who is a climate activist. And she told me 2 years ago that, much to my surprise, I am part of the patriarchy and therefore I am part of a sexist system. It came as a shock to me, and I pledged that I would do something in response by using my privilege and my power to amplify the voices of women and girls. And so that's what I've really strived to do with this report. It has been 75 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declared that all human beings are born free and equal in rights and dignity. It has been more than 40 years since the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women came into force. And yet we are still living in a world where there is systemic discrimination against women and girls that undermines their ability to enjoy their human rights. Ambassador Pipin spoke of some of the statistics in the report. In terms of the triple planetary crisis, women and girls are systematically excluded from participating in decision-making. They are unable to get a fair share of the incredible benefits of nature, and they bear a disproportionate burden of the triple planetary crisis, the climate emergency, the loss of biodiversity, and pervasive toxic pollution. Let me give you just a handful of quick examples. Because of gendered cooking responsibilities, millions of women and girls die because of household air pollution every year. In households that lack access to water on the premises, the collection of water is a burden borne in 80% of those households by women and primarily girls. Women are disproportionately vulnerable to toxic substances that cause heart disease, respiratory illnesses, cancer, and reproductive illnesses. And 80% of the people who are displaced by climate-related disasters are women and girls. So it's clear that this triple planetary crisis is having these disproportionate impacts. And that's the bad news. The good news is we know that women and girls have a track record of inspiring leadership when it comes to being human rights defenders and environmental human rights defenders. We know that when women and girls are involved in the development and implementation of climate and environmental policies, the outcomes are better. There's a positive correlation between women in positions of political authority, lower carbon footprints, higher ratification of environmental treaties, and stronger environmental standards. Incredible, really. And those are the types of outcomes that we so urgently need in this triple planetary crisis. So I think it's really critical, and this is the categories of recommendations in our report, that we have actions by states to empower women and girls as climate and environmental leaders. Examples of that would be education and breaking down the barriers to equitable participation. The second category of recommendation is to empower women and girls as economic actors. So, for example, through equitable and equal land ownership and access to natural resource tenures. The third category of actions relates to accelerating the pace of climate and environmental action. And that means taking rights-based, gender transformative actions to ensure that every woman and every girl can breathe clean air, has access to safe and sufficient water and sanitation, eats healthy and sustainably produced food, live in non-toxic environments with healthy ecosystems, healthy biodiversity, and has access to a safe and livable climate. And I should add that thanks to my amazing colleague, Stephanie Keane, we have an annex of good practices to this report, which includes literally hundreds of examples of good practices in recognizing and implementing women's and girls' rights to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The final thing I'll say is that we also need to provide additional resources to women and girls. So whether that's through grants to grassroots organizations working on climate and environmental action, or increased finance through the biodiversity and climate finance mechanisms, those are the steps that are critically important. And I'll leave it at there for the opening statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boyd, and thank you very much for praising our work. Moving on to Viviana, we would like to hear from you some good practice, examples of good practices from the experience of Costa Rica with regards to the right to a healthy environment from the perspective of women and girls. Viviana, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana, and thank you to the panelists for being here today. And thank you for David for his report, which was very impressive, I have to say. It was very eye-opening. As you have said, women and girls bear the most disproportionate part of the effects of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And unfortunately as well, we have not always been taken into consideration when it comes to policymaking or conservation projects either. But I have to say, this has not been the exception in my country, Costa Rica. We also have problems with discrimination against women, but we have been trying to work on this. And on the side of conservation, in 2019, we created a gender action plan for the RED Plus strategy. For all of you who don't know what the RED Plus is the reduction of emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, taking into consideration conservation and sustainable use of forests. So in 2019, we worked with indigenous communities, civil society, and small rural producers to create a roadmap of how we can include women into this strategy. We found out during this process that women own only 15% of all the properties in Costa Rica, which is a very small number. If we consider how much we have in forest coverage, we only have almost 60% of forest coverage in the country. Of that, only 15% belongs to women. So we saw a clear gap. So with that, the country started prioritizing its program for payment for environmental services to women. So we are trying to give financial recognition for the compensation of carbon emissions, protection of biodiversity and water sources, as well as the scenic beauty that those properties have. So women are already becoming more empowered with their own money and their own properties. And this whole program belongs to a bit wider program, which is called Plus Women Plus Nature, which is financed with the World Bank and UNDP to create small loans and other facilities for women to access financial resources. The other example that I wanted to present today, which is not a government-led initiative, it's a civil society initiative from a cooperative of women in Punta Arenas, a coastal city. The cooperative is formed by 50 people, 47 of which are women, and they work on the mollusk industry, on the mangroves. So they understand the relationship that they need to have with this ecosystem. They understand that their industry is extractive. So they have been planting native trees and dedicating time of their work, 2 days a month, to clean the beach and the mangroves of plastic pollution there is around, so that they can help repopulate the biodiversity of this ecosystem. And as you know, mangroves and wetlands are extremely important in the fight against climate change, water resources, and food security. So I wanted to present those two small initiatives that we have in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viviana. We are now moving to Rwanda, where we have with us online Priska, a child activist, as I mentioned earlier, who is just back from school. Priska Amakuru, I understand that you conduct important work as a child rights activist on child rights and the environment in Rwanda. Could you please tell us about the challenge of your community, your personal experience, and the activities that you are doing to address these challenges? You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone.
You are
My name
muted.
is-
Maybe Innocent, yes, perfect. Priska, you can start. Thank you.
Okay, my name is
Ah, no,
Priska. I
muted.
am
You have to put the...
Ah, sorry. Sorry.
from Rwanda. I am student and live with my mother and two brothers. I am group leader of children's grassroots group working in community. Through our groups, I participate in awareness and advocacy activity on children's life. And our group, I participate in awareness environmental protection issue in our community. In a collaboration with parents and local leaders, we advocate for children who are out of school, working in danger conditions, living in street, born to young mother and affected by child abuse. Concerning girls' health, environment, climate change, and environmental degradation has many effects that affect children, especially girls. Scarcity of water, scarcity of food, air pollution, increase of diseases like the plague, natural hazard like landslide, flood, and death. Issue in my community, for example, in my community, when it is dry season, it's difficult to get water. In this period, many people are dry people will have to go some few where wells is remaining. For example, let me tell you my story. I wake up early in the morning, and since we do not have water in our house, I immediately take jerrycan and walk 4 kilometers to well fetch water. When I come, I have to go to washroom and then I have walk 5 kilometers to school. When I reached at the well, there is so many people. They are fighting for water. The strong ones, special men and boys, have to get water first. Then girls and women can fetch after. When I found the good people who understand that I'm student, I need to go to study early, they do me favor and let me fetch fast. But when I don't find the people who understand me, I have to wait until fighting is over and then fetch water peacefully because I don't have power to fight with those men. From there, I reached to my school very late because I also have to walk a distances. When I reached at school, I punched leave for leaving late. They either beat me or make me clean the classrooms, send me back at home for parents, or deduct me 5 points from my discipline marks, which is a risk to my overall school performance. This is hard for me. However, it is not me alone experiencing the same problems, but many other children, especially girls in my community. This is make me sad. More to that, the issue is becoming worse and worse as environment is continually destroyed, water scarcity is increasing around my community, and people will fight more and more. This will affect the children, special girls, as they are alone, one who normally have to domestic work, missing and leaving school violence to children. Through the grassroots group, the different activities to protect our environment, which are including awareness on climate change and environmental protection, our fellow children and community and school about their role in protecting the environment. Planting trees, including fruit trees, in homes and public places where they never existed or been destroyed. We get seedlings that are provided by a local authorized and plant them in different places. Since last year, we have planted 183 trees. I would like to request the government and international agencies to allocate enough budget for addressing climate change and environmental protection, engaging all people, including children and women, in programs to protect the environment, building many water wells in different places, respect and protect the right of women, increase the capacity of girls and women in order to have power and participate in decision making. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Priska, for sharing your experience. We are now moving to Stephanie Keane. We have heard from the Special Rapporteur that you have a lot to share with us. So could you please provide us with some additional good practices from states on the implementation of the right to a healthy environment from the perspective of girls and women?
Absolutely. Thank you, Diana. So the annex to the Special Rapporteur's latest report actually features over 200 good practices on the recognition and implementation of women and girls' right to a healthy environment. And I just want to discuss a few. So the Gambia's Women's Act of 2010 guarantees women freedom from all forms of discrimination. It recognizes women's right to a healthy and sustainable environment, to food security, sustainable development, and a range of other rights. It takes an intersectional approach by providing specific measures and specific protections for rural women, elderly women, and disabled women. And it commits the Gambia to a range of very important appropriate measures, including to increasing women's participation in environmental management. Thailand's largest solar power generation company is women-led and prioritizes women's inclusion in the clean energy sector. The Solar Power Company Group has installed 36 solar farms across the country that eliminate over 200,000 tons of CO2 emissions annually, while also improving local air quality by reducing fossil fuel combustion. In Sweden, after scientists discovered polybrominated diphenyl ethers, or PBDEs, in the breast milk of Swedish women, the government acted swiftly to ban PBDEs domestically. They also led a global and successful effort to add PBDEs to the Stockholm Convention's list of prohibited substances, and PBDEs in breast milk declined rapidly thereafter. Bolivia and partners implemented a wonderful 6-year biodiversity conservation initiative that benefited over 27,000 indigenous, peasant, and local community women, in addition to youth and men. And the project was grounded in a gender and inclusion strategy, and it was heavily influenced by the gender differentiated traditional and scientific knowledge of beneficiaries related to nature management. And to increase women's participation and enable their availability, the project actually provided childcare to women, thus reducing their workload. It established over 500 women-led ecosystem and biodiversity management groups, and women's groups received almost half of the conservation allotment provided by the project. And this was especially empowering for Indigenous women because they were managing funds directly, oftentimes for the first time. So it's quite socially transformative. And finally, in the United States, in 2019 alone, the Global Food Security and Nutrition Initiative, Feed the Future, helped almost 2.4 million women worldwide to improve their agricultural practices, in addition to reaching over 8.5 million pregnant women with nutrition-specific interventions. And these are just a fraction of the good practices that exist around the world. So clearly, gender transformative climate and environmental action is taking place. It's ongoing in a range of geographies and context. And what's really encouraging is that what this means is that the realization of women and girls' right to a healthy environment is very achievable. However, what we do need is increased political will, expanded and enhanced gender transformative environmental education, and increased gender responsiveness across all sectors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. We move to the last panelist, Soyoung You have mentioned already in this space a few days ago that work has been undertaken by the United Nations Environment Programme to provide an overview of work conducted by human rights mechanisms in Geneva on the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Could you please highlight the conclusions of this overview, in particular from the perspective of women and girls?
Okay. Thank you, Diana, and thanks so much for having UNEP here in this event. So the work that we are embarking actually is still work in progress. So what I would like to do is introduce what we are working on and also introduce some preliminary findings and also lay out some next steps of what needs to be done. So what the UNEP is working on is a database that tracks the recommendations from the human rights treaty bodies and UPR processes and those select special rapporteurs on environment issues. So it includes all environmental issues, climate, biodiversity, conservation, pollution. And also this, what is really important in the perspective of gender is that we're going to actually have disaggregate this data so that we can track it with one click that you can see the rights holders by indigenous peoples or women or girls, because we don't have such data. And also what's really important is that we have so many great resolutions and reports, and but we need one place where we can actually find all this all data with easy access. So that's what we are working on right now, and it's still preliminary. We wanted to actually present it and and then at this council of the session, but it didn't happen because it requires a lot more like vetting and the verification. So hopefully it will maybe at the next session of the council, but it's ongoing work, and we hope that this will be actually helpful, like for countries, also for you to track the recommendations related to environment in a certain country or certain regional groups, or to find out the trends of the environmental issues over the 10 years, such as like before, like we observed a lot more recommendations related to environment and businesses in the recent years compared to 10 years ago. And we see more climate and biodiversity. So these recommendations will be able to actually tell you the trends and what countries are doing and how the recommendations are being recommended and implemented, and it will be an easy access for countries, but also academics and the CSOs, and also the UN country teams working on the country level. They always say that we want to do work more, but we need more resources, and this will be we believe this will be a great tool to do it. And on gender, this is we talk about disaggregate data, the importance of it. You know, we need to know like how we're doing in terms of gender equality in environmental affairs and in, the MEAs. So this we hope that this will provide a tool to actually measure and also track what we're how we're doing in terms of the rights of gender, rights of women and girls and other populations. And so very preliminary findings that we have is we had this, so there are a lot of references to gender and to women and girls in relation to the environment, but they are pretty much focused on a lot of select rapporteurs, especially those that work on gender and women's issues, and also the treaty bodies that work on gender issues. So you can imagine how that's not mainstreamed throughout the whole the human rights mechanisms and bodies. So this is one thing we found out. And also the UPR, this is a lot of countries making the recommendations on the gender issues. They also select their same countries are making the similar recommendations and women and girls in the to various countries. So, and what does it tell us is, so do we need to work further on the gender mainstreaming in other treaties and also throughout the special procedure system and the procedures mechanisms and also the UPR processes. And second is how are we going to, so the recommendations are very short as you all know, and but still is how are we going to spell it out? And in that, I think special rapporteurs work on good practices is super helpful. So because we're questioned a lot about like what is a rights-based approach, what is gender responsiveness in environmental matters, and we say use your imagination, but that's not an answer. So Then having actually the good practices and show the countries and all the other stakeholders, this is how it was done and how it was successful. So what we also may consider doing is, so for this database, we may also have more like substance to these recommendations to show like those are the good practices and how it was done. So this will be our next steps on making things this database work with the recommendations, but also with examples of good practices in this regard. So stay tuned, and we'll be very happy to present this report once ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Young. We have now time to answer a few questions. If you have, we have heard various experiences, challenges, and also interesting work ongoing, good practices, and recommendations to do more. I'm looking at the room. Yes, Maldives, sorry. And I see a lady. Let's take 2 or 3, and then we turn to the panel. The Maldives, please.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Let me first of all thank all the panelists for a very interesting and inspiring discussion today. And always a special thanks to the Special Rapporteur for his comprehensive and very insightful report. And Maldives is very happy to co-sponsor this event today. From the SR's report, what was really striking for me is the correlation that the SR has outlined that exists having women in decision-making roles and the positive impact on the environment. In the report, SR has highlighted that women in positions of political authority have lower national carbon footprints, and parliaments with greater proportion of women are more likely to ratify environmental treaties. The Maldives understands the importance of women leaders, and we would like to ask the panel, what are some concrete actions that can be taken to promote women in leadership and decision-making roles across all levels and all sectors that would support women and girls in realizing their right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? Thank you.
The lady on the left, could you introduce yourself also? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Mrs. Shawl. I'm from International Muslim Women Union. Thank you, panelists, for the wonderful these statements about the women and girls and healthy environment and management in environment. I just want to know that how women and girls can work for the healthy environment. And we know, everybody knows that they are not only friendly to the environment, but they love nature, they love plantation, they love forests. And in my country, the 70% land is the agricultural land where women work in their agriculture places, but they are not safe because of the 1 million troops engaged in different practices, like when they are searching the houses and they are not safe to work outside the home. In this environment where there are the troops, army, along with the weapons, how we can suggest that they can work in their safe environment, in the safe environment for their health, for the environment, for the climate, because we have seen the changes in the climate. And during these 10 years, it is that latest report that in 2022, that 2 to 5% increase in the temperature and increase in this carbon dioxide has been seen in the northern region of the Indian administered Kashmir. I'm representing my people, and I want to know how the women can work in these environmental situations when there are the army men, and in presence it is very difficult to work for the healthy environment.
Thank you for sharing this experience. Should we start answering? I'm looking at the panel. Oh, no, there's another. Sorry, Ben, I didn't see you. So, Ben Shelters from the Office of the High Commissioner.
Thank you very much for the excellent presentations. Ben Schachter with UN Human Rights. I'll be very quick. I just wanted to ask for reflections and insights as well on the rights of gender diverse persons.
So I think now we can start answering. I saw, Stephanie, that you were, should we start by you, David? And then we move to Stephanie? Okay, Stephanie, I saw that you were.
Just to maybe not take these in order, but for the last question on gender diverse persons, certainly the Special Rapporteur's annex highlights the relative dearth of good practices focusing on LGBT persons and the right to health and healthy environment. So that certainly is a point or an opportunity. There's a huge opportunity to fill the gap and a massive data gap. LGBT people are simply not being tracked, particularly in post-disaster context, and their experiences are therefore being erased. Although we know that there's many, many, many parallels between the experience of LGBT people and the right to health environment and women and girls. So thank you for raising that. I also wanted to say, I can't necessarily recount the examples on the top of my head, but in the context of armed conflicts and gender-based violence, there are several examples that may be of interest to you in the Special Rapporteur's annex, where there have been various approaches to addressing environmental gender-based violence, addressing women's right to a healthy environment in armed conflict and other sort of situations that may be relevant. But that's another place where there's a lot of opportunities for increased good practices. That's another dearth that's pointed out in the report.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. We originally set out to develop a report on gender and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, and we ultimately narrowed our focus to women and girls because of a lack of accessible information. And so we do have references in the report to gender diverse persons, but we were unable to gather sufficient information to do a credible job of addressing that topic. So I think it's an important topic, and I think it probably merits its own report in the future. In terms of ensuring that women and girls have access to political authority and positions of power, I think that there are a number of examples of good practices in our good practices annex, but I think at the heart of the issue are a couple of things. One is that we need to improve access to education for girls. We need to provide young women with opportunities. And I'll give you one example from our Good Practices Annex, which I find incredibly inspiring. And it's a group of 4 young women who have been climate activists since their teenage years, but always felt as though they were on the outside looking in a sense, and they wanted to be actually part of the negotiations. And so they created a program called the Climate Youth Negotiators Program. They got some funding, and they did all of this in the course of 1 year, which is really amazing. What they did was they got funding and they got agreement from 27 states to include young people on their negotiating teams at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. These 4 young women then provided training sessions both online and in Cairo prior to the Conference of the Parties. And they ended up with more than 50 youth delegates on national delegations in Sharm el-Sheikh. And I believe that that is going to have a transformative impact going forward on these climate negotiations. 70% of those youth delegates were young women. So just a really inspiring example of what can be done. And I also think that in politics more generally, there are states where there are actually quotas for women, women in parliament, women on local government. And I think, you know, the other statistics that Ambassador Pipan didn't mention from the report are that only 16% of government ministers today are women. I mean, it's, to me, some of these statistics are just shocking. Only 9% of the CEOs of large corporations are women. 9%. I mean, so one thing that I want to say as we run short of time is just to make a plea to my brothers in the room that we, all of us as men, acknowledge our privilege and our power, that we advocate for the empowerment of women and girls as leaders in climate and environmental action, and that we act to support those women as they move into those positions. So it's just a plea to my brothers in the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Boyd. I'm looking in at the room. On my right. Yes, we have a question and a second one there. So I would start the lady at the bottom. If you could introduce yourself, and then we go to Mexico.
Hi. Florence Bourgeois from Plan International, working on the rights of children and youth and gender equality. Just wanted to thank the panelists and actually to have included the voice of girls. I think it's really important to have them speak at such events. And I have a very concrete question about the dissemination and of the report, and if you're planning any proactive dissemination, advocacy, because it seemed a very important report, and the good practices and how you're going to actually share them beyond this and this session. Thanks.
Mexico?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thank you very much to the panelists for their excellent presentations and for having a very diverse and interesting panel. Just a question for Mr. Boyd and for Ms. Keane. I was wondering if in the good practices, you identified any cases of matriarchal communities and the way, and if you have any reflections on the way these matriarchal communities deal with environmental issues and in comparison with typically patriarchal societies or communities. Thank you.
You start, and then we move to Dr. Boyd.
Thank you. So the Special Rapporteur's Annex doesn't expressly discuss matriarchal communities, but certainly there are matriarchal indigenous and local communities around the world, and there's data supporting increased effectiveness in terms of ecosystem management, in terms of conservation in those communities. It doesn't mean it's a panacea. It's not an automatic quick fix. But obviously, anytime, I mean, the data is very clear on this, whether it's a rural local community or a government body, anytime women and men have equitable stakes, equitable voices, the outcomes are just better and everyone wins, including the planet. So that is very clear. And I think you'll find examples of matriarchal communities across sub-Saharan Africa and Asia that would also support that.
I suggest that, Dr. Boyd, as you take the floor, you can also start the conclusion of this event. And just on the outreach, there will be other events that will count on the participation of the Special Rapporteur, where he's going to present his report. And one of them is taking place tomorrow at 8:30 at the International Environment House. Dr. Boyd, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diana. Yes, and certainly one of the ways that we hope to ensure the broad dissemination of the report is through our partners in the United Nations family, with partners like United Nations Environment Program, United Nations Women, UNICEF, and others. I would also welcome the opportunity to work together with groups like Plan International to develop a child-friendly version of this report. I think that would be really super useful. We haven't had an opportunity to do so as yet, but we would love to do that. And I would just like to close by really paying tribute to my fellow panelists who have been just such a rich discussion. Ambassador Pipin, thank you for your opening comments. Adriana, Suyang, Stephanie, Viviana, and Diana, and an especially warm thank you to Priska and Nikte, who I thought were incredible youth voices. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us. Thank you to the sponsors of this event. And just in conclusion, I think that we have heard some inspiring stories of good practices today, but I think we should be also sober about the challenges ahead of us. I mean, the triple planetary crisis demands systemic and transformative changes. The fact that we face systemic gender discrimination in such epic proportions is also a very daunting crisis. And I believe that we can't solve either of those problems if we don't solve both of them. So I look forward to working together with all of you to work towards a gender equitable and ecologically sustainable society. And thank you for your time. Thank you very much. Can't wait to see got everybody like, when will it be out? When will it be out?
I think
Nice to meet you too.